take Šešelj with you and do not send him back. Djindjic had previous meetings with Carla Del Ponte, as well as the other politicians of the pro-Western traitor regime in Belgrade. And it was not only Djindjic that wanted me eliminated from the Serbian political life. Many others requested that, but Djindjic's request was the most remarkable one, and that's why Carla Del Ponte dealt with it in a very remarkable way in her book. Florence Altman, the former porte-parole for Carla Del Ponte, in her own book explains to what extent the Western intelligence services are involved in the work of this tribunal. She highlights the American and British intelligence services in her book, and they indeed are involved. We knew that even before her book appeared, and when the book did appear, then it became blatantly obvious. The fact that the indictment was issued against me over 9 years ago was motivated by the attempts for me to be eliminated from the Serbian political life forever. In the meantime, the Serbian Radical Party should have been either destroyed or kidnapped. That kidnapping should have taken the place in the following way. It would not be the same party ever again. It would serve the interests of pro-Western forces in England, Germany, the United States, the entire European Union, the Vatican, all of which work against the Serbian interests. And it has been demonstrated that everything was geared in that direction for the whole of 4 years. There was a fight going on here for me to have the right to defend myself. The idea was for a lawyer to be imposed on me from England, from the Netherlands, or wherever, and they would have pretended that they were defending me, and with their help the prosecutor would have filled up the case file with the so-called exhibits, and the trial would not have taken a long time, because both the defense counsel and the prosecution would have been on the same side. That's how the prosecutor envisaged to introduce all of their papers in the same way they did it in 2010. When you judges saw that there was no evidence against me, then you started receiving all those exhibits that you had previously turned down as exhibits. For example, Milan Babic's statement, all the documents accompanying his statement, then Miroslav Deronic's statement, and God knows who else. There are some protected names, so I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to go into private session, and I don't want you to subsequently intervene in the recording. This is the essence. I had to risk my life in order to win my elementary right. Hermann Göring did not have those problems. Rudolf Hess did not have those problems. Not a single Hitler's leader had such problems. They had the right to defend themselves. They had the right to hire any lawyer under the sun. Nobody told them that lawyer had to be from the list of the tribunal, that they had to speak English and any such thing. This tribunal is even worse than the Nuremberg tribunal, because the Nuremberg tribunal, although it was not an international tribunal in the proper sense of the word, but a martial court of the victorious parties, and not even Yugoslavia could join that tribunal, although it belonged to the victorious parties of the anti-Hitler coalition. If that had been a true international court, it would have had both sides on trial. It would have tried Hitler's leaders for genocide against the Jews, for causing an aggressive war, for crimes against humanity, the violation of the customs of law, and so on and so forth. But it would have also tried the Americans and the Brits for the bombing of Dresden, Cologne, and many other settled areas all over Germany. Civilians were wantonly killed on both sides, and a similar international court would have tried Americans for throwing atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In order to correct the mistake made by the Nuremberg Tribunal, the Hague Tribunal charges 80% of Serbs and puts them on trial, and 20% of all others, including Croats, Muslims, Albanians, Macedonians, and so on and so forth. The Hague Tribunal wants to show itself as an objective international factor, but it actually pinpoints the main culprits in the war in advance. When it comes to the Serbs, only the highest leaders of the military and police hierarchy are on trial. When it comes to the others, only the second-ranking or third-ranking people are put on trial. And when it comes to sentences, the story is even more remarkable. The Serbs are tried to life at the drop of a hat, and for the Muslims, for example, you engage in very heated discussions as to whether a Muslim general is going to get 2 years or 3 years a sentence. So the first decision is 2 years, and then the appeal chamber reduces that to 1 year. And this is the nature of this tribunal. When I finally won the battle for the right to defend myself, another battle started, and that was for all the other trial preconditions to be met, because the prosecution had not tried very hard to work on this case. They thought that everything would finish very soon, and when they were supposed to disclose the exculpatory material in my own language, they couldn't do it because nothing had been done before the beginning of trial. The trial started without the prosecution ever having met all of their requirements, and names of protected witnesses should have been published 1 month, disclosed 1 month before the beginning of trial. Well, that's why you judges made the decision not to start counting the trial as having started on the 7th of November, but as of some date in December when the first witness appeared. In all the official documents of the tribunal, it is stated that my trial started on the 7th of November. And for the sake of a very small procedural benefit, you made the decision that the trial did not start with the opening statement by the prosecution, but rather by the appearance of the first witness. As we have seen in a document that was published by WikiLeaks, Western intelligence services are certainly very concerned with my trial. At a meeting which was held in December 2006, which was attended by the American Undersecretary of the Ministry of Defense, Eric Edelman, a top-notch intelligence man, and there was also an envoy of defense and the Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Defense, Daniel Fatt, and political officer. They met on the 1st December in Champs-Élysées with MGM, their counterpart for security in France. He accompanied Dominique Cochet, the advisor of President Chirac for Near East, Admiral Gallienne, the presidential military advisor, and an advisor for strategic affairs, Lawrence Illy. I'm not sure whether I have pronounced the family names properly. Who is that famous or notorious MGM? That's Maurice Gordon-Montan, the key person in the French intelligence service, an advisor of a war criminal, Jacques Chirac. You know that Jacques Chirac was sentenced to 20 years in Belgrade for war crimes. That's a maximum penalty that a Serbian tribunal could pronounce for war crimes. According to the minutes of the meeting and the report that was submitted to Washington, this MGM says that they had to do everything in their power to prevent my victory in the Serbian elections. That was on the 1st of December 2006. I was still on a hunger strike. My hunger strike went on until the 8th of December. I was even convinced that they would let me die on them. And then an announcement appeared by the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a very serious announcement, a very serious communique, and things changed rapidly immediately after that, and all of my requests were expressly met. I did not even write my own submission about that. The warden of the detention unit came and told me that his service would write that in English. According to that, there would be no sent by a lawyer. No lawyer would be imposed on me. I was appointed legal counsel. My wife Jadranka all of a sudden could visit me. All of the materials had to be submitted to me in the Serbian on paper, and I really don't remember what else I requested.
That was in December 2006. Now, the proceedings began, and my impression was that both the trial chamber and the OTP had hoped that, in view of the interests of those main instigators of these proceedings, everything was going to end successfully. However, the first OTP witness, Oberschall, is knocked out in the courtroom. The next witness, Tunens, an employee of the OTP, is also knocked out in the courtroom. The third witness, Eve Tomic, is also knocked out in the courtroom. A number of key OTP witnesses did not fare well at all in the courtroom. Now, what happened next? Next, they resorted to stalling the process. By the end of 2007, the OTP could definitely have heard all the witnesses. However, there was a synchronized effort on the part of the trial chamber and the OTP, and it was postponed endlessly. The OTP even asked for Judge Harkov to be disqualified because back in Denmark he participated in the interrogation of a witness which made him partial. Mr. Mandic then asked for an adjournment so that they wanted to enter into negotiations with me. They wanted me to agree to a bargain of 10 years in prison, but I said here in the courtroom There is nothing that I have to discuss with the OTP. I needn't remind you how all this went sloppy all the way to 2008. Once they realized that they cannot defeat me so easily in the courtroom, and when they realized that the popularity of the SRS in Serbia was skyrocketing, then the foreign Western intelligence services started breaking up my party from within. Another prominent French intelligence officer played a crucial role in that, alongside the US, the British, and the German intelligence officers. We heard from some dispatches what they personally think about Tomislav Nikolic, that he had bought his university degree, but when they meet with him face to face, they pat him on the shoulder, tell him how good he was, and instructed him to get rid of Šešelj and embark on a new path. As for Aleksandar Vučić, they might still count on him, but it seems that they have completely eliminated Tomislav Nikolic. Arnaud Danjean is the name of that French intelligence officer. He is a member of the European Parliament from the list of Nicolas Sarkozy, a war criminal. Why is he a war criminal? Because of the bombing of Libya. Of course, Danjean is one of the main proteges of Stanko Subotic, a.k.a. Cane Žabac, one of the biggest mafia figures in Serbia. He provides protection to him in the hope that he could achieve some political points in Belgrade, because the incumbent regime, regardless of the fact that it is pro-Western and that very often it accepts the requests of the West, even if they are contrary to the interests of Serbia, they are not ready to give in completely. So they are trying to balance this. You don't want to accept the independence of Kosovo, then Aleksandar Vučić and Tomislav Nikolic will do that. Now that is the game that is being played. And of course, Danjean is infamously known for his dirty deals in the Balkans. He operated as a spy in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Kosovo and Metohija, and Montenegro. Then in 2002 he joined the French Foreign Ministry, and for a time he was an advisor to Javier Solana. Then again in 2005, as an intelligence officer, he became an advisor to the French Foreign Minister for Eastern Europe. And then in, I think, 2012 or 2011, he was elected an EMP. It was widely covered in the newspapers. For example, Vreme of the 6th of August 2009 claims that Danjean is a good friend of Milo Đukanović, and you know who Milo Đukanović is. He is a mafia boss, a prominent mafia boss, and there are a number of court proceedings conducted against him in Italy for cigarette smuggling, and he is still trying to evade that by invoking his presidential position. it was Darjan who allowed and made it possible for Subotić to move freely. They organized a meeting between Nicolas Sarkozy and Subotić, and according to Vreme, he helped Tomislav Nikolić in his breaking up the Serbian Radical Party, while at the same time maintaining close contacts with Čedomir Milanović and Beba Popović. Arjan, in 1994, was the head of the French intelligence agency in Sarajevo, and he is directly involved in the investigation of the Srebrenica crime. Petrušić and the commander of the 10th Sabotage Detachment are not tried at all, and this is Mr. Pelemiš, whilst on the other hand, other people who were not involved in that at all were on trial. We can see that from books wrote about this topic. A huge crime, the killing of at least 5,000 Muslim men, were to be killed, and that would constitute an excuse for bombing the Serbs. Of course, I'm not excusing anyone on the Serbian side who took part in that crime, but the Serbs are the only ones who are held accountable, and it was Arno Darjan who framed them. He took part in the Rambouillet negotiations, then he was one of the chief advisor of Bernard Kouchner. We all remember the criminal Bernard Kouchner and this spy organization Médecins Sans Frontières. He was the governor of Kosovo Metohija, and finally he was the French foreign minister. So, here we have another prominent French intelligence officer who, according to all the available information, is working against me and the Serbian Radical Party. As a deputy in the European Parliament, he harshly attacked Dick Marty because of his report on the organized crime in Kosovo and Metohija and the harvesting and implanting organs from the detained Serbs all over the world. Carla de Porte herself started to investigate this, but she complained that she had been thwarted in her efforts. And for that, Arjan really attacked him in harsh terms in the European Parliament. He is also one of the main instigators of an attempted coup d'etat in the Serbian Radical Party. Although I have been in detention for so many years, I am more competent than Montaigne and Darjan, and eventually I managed to prevent all their attempts.
Je proces po tužilaštvo krenuo caljavo.
Since the OTP case started in such a sloppy manner, and since the Western powers realized that they cannot expect favorable results of the proceedings, they started attacking my health condition. I used to be a relatively healthy person. I had suffered from asthma and some blood pressure problems, but I managed to keep it under control by taking proper medication. First, there was an attack on my liver. As soon as I realized that, I started an outcry, because I know that only if I am noisy when you deal with Western powers, you can do something. After that, my liver recovered itself with no assistance. Then they moved to my heart. They had been attacking my heart for the past 3 years. It is still working, and I hope it will work until I finish my closing argument. I don't know how they are achieving this, but their attempts are both ridiculous and abhorrent, especially those of the medical personnel who attribute these problems to my obesity. My blood vessels are in excellent condition, just like in a young man. I was subjected to coronography. I never had raised sugar levels in my blood. I never had raised levels of cholesterol and triglyceride in my blood. Now, what is the cause of this? Electricity. How is this electricity generated that is damaging my heart? It sounded to me as a science fiction until the night between 8th and 9th March. Back in January, I had the so-called ICPD implanted, and this defibrillator was not operating properly. It was obvious from the start. However, on the night between the 8th and 9th March of this year, this defibrillator simply went berserk. I had been feeling well before that, but I woke up during the night. I had watched a movie, and at 4:15, I felt the first electrical shock. I took my own device and measured my pulse rate, and it was almost normal, 75. The defibrillator is programmed to cause electrical shocks only if this rate exceeds 75, which means that it should intervene in order to prevent death. However, there was no need for it to be activated. Then, at 4:30, another electrical shock came, and then another, and then another. Eventually, I pressed the alarm button that stands next to my bed, but it was broken. I stood up and pressed the alarm button next to the door. And there's such a button in every cell, but it was broken too. Luckily, thanks to Mr. Antonetti's efforts, I managed to be given 2 adjoining cells. I went to the other one, pressed the alarm, and it finally went off. Those who switched off the first 2 alarms simply forgot about the third one. The guards appeared. Between 5:30 and 5:45, I had 4 electrical shocks that were throwing me around the cell. Do you know how that feels? That feels as if you are crossing the street where there's no crossing and you get hit by a tram. You manage to get up somehow, and then you're hit by another tram, and that was repeated 6 times. The last one was at 6:30. The guards called the doctor, who arrived after 40 minutes. As soon as he realized what was going on, he called an ambulance, and I was taken to Leiden. I was wondering whether anyone was going to believe me that these electrical shocks happened out of the blue. When I arrived there, they found this recorded in the memory of the defibrillator, and there were 6 of them. A nurse arrived at 8 o'clock, and she checked everybody's ICD, and she told me, I realized immediately what the case was with you, and I would have called the ambulance right away. Now, everyone is wondering, how is it possible that this defibrillator was broken, and then I had to undergo another surgery? Initially, they didn't have a free bed, and they postponed it for the next Monday, but somehow they managed to find a slot in their schedule, and it was conducted on the Friday. I asked many doctors if they had ever heard of the ICD going berserk without any apparent reason and causing electrical shocks. Each and every one told me that they had heard nothing ever of such an occurrence. This was something that was caused externally. That was an attempted murder. I don't think there can be other explanation.
Koliko o političkoj pozadini.
Now, so much for the political background of this trial and the intentions of their main creators. They designed to kill me sometime between the closing argument and the rendering of the judgment. This was one of their attempts, and I'm sure that they will not give up so easily, particularly now when there is election campaign underway and the results are showing in the polls that the Serbian Radical Party is in a good position and that it will achieve good election results. Let us now move to what the OTP stated in their closing argument. I wanted to present to you some documents, some books, even some video clips. However, I decided not to do that because I don't have proper conditions to work. I have no assistance available. So in my closing argument, I shall be focusing only on what the prosecution said. The rest is probably not interesting enough.
Prosecutor Markuson began with the theory that exactly 20 years ago, on the 5th of March 92, I gave my word that the Serbian Radical Party was prepared to obstruct the independence of Bosnia and Herzegovina by all possible means, and that if that independence happens, rivers of blood would flow. In his eyes, that's a key thesis. The key proof that I wanted war crimes, that I designed them, and that I later instigated, planned, prepared them, even executed them myself. How was the independence and secession of Bosnia and Herzegovina possible if the Serbian people were not agreeing with it? Both Bosnia and Herzegovina and Croatia, like all the other federal units of the former Yugoslavia, had not been constituted in a democratic way. The original Yugoslavia was a unitarian state. It was created through an anti-constitutional act sometime in 1939. The then government agreed with Croatia that a certain part of the territory would be formed into a so-called Banovina. That was done by the Prince Regent Karađorđević and his head of government, Radiša Cvetković, in agreement with the Croatian leader, Maček. That was completely unconstitutional, and it never was ratified by the parliament. In any case, that unitarian Yugoslavia, by the will of the communists during and after the Second World War, became a federation. And the communists decided on those federal units completely arbitrarily. They decided there would be 6 of them. They invented completely new nations. Okay, Macedonians. We can say Macedonians are very close to us Serbs, similar, but they are not exactly the same thing. But they invented then the Montenegrin nation. And then 20 years after the war, they made up the Muslim nation. Imagine, if you can, you in France have a lot of French Muslims. Imagine if they said suddenly, we are not French people anymore, we are a separate Muslim nation. Imagine the same happening in Italy or in Denmark. You would find that funny. You would find it laughable. In Yugoslavia, it turned out to be tragic. The Croatian federal unit was constituted by the will of the communists without any democratic procedure. However, the communists provided guarantees that that federal unit was, as they put it, the state of both the Croatian and the Serbian people living there. Because when the military border under the Austro-Hungarian Empire was attached to Croatia and Slavonia in 1881, the Serbs received a guarantee that they would be a constituent people on an equal footing with the Croats. What did that mean? That means that the Croats, with their numerical strength, could never outvote the Serbs on key constitutional issues concerning status. Croatia should never have been able to declare independence without the agreement of the constituent Serbian representatives living there. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, the situation was even clearer. None of those constituencies, none of the 3, had an absolute majority. Serbs had the majority before the war, before they suffered a genocide. But after the war, no longer. Bosnia and Herzegovina was constituted as a federal unit comprising Serbs, Croats and Muslims. And only with the agreement of all 3 could their status be changed, which means that the Muslims and Croats could not have just outvoted Serbs. But it happened. And what kind of people would we Serbs be if we had not stood up for our own rights? We were honest enough to say in advance, you have no right to abolish the Serb people's status as a constituent people. If you do that, you will cause war. There will be rivers of blood, and the rivers of blood happened. Not because I am clairvoyant. Any serious, any intelligent person could see that it was in the offing. You want to go away? We Serbs don't. And what are you going to do now? Outvote us? You have no right to outvote us. Because when Bosnia and Herzegovina was constituted as a federal unit, we had received the guarantee that nobody could outvote us. When Croatia was constituted as a federal unit, we received the same guarantee that we Serbs would not be outvoted concerning the statehood of Croatia. And suddenly, all bets were off, because the European Community, later European Union, said different. The US said different. The international swindler Badinter would say different with his infamous commission. Well, no way. The Serbs had to oppose that. And when push came to shove, they had to take up arms. And this resistance was successful. The Serbs created the Republic of Serbian Krajina and Republika Srpska, because they said, if you want to secede, feel free to go, but without us, without our territories. Now, when a war breaks out, it is natural that every warring party wants to occupy as much territory as possible. That's how things happen in a war. You stop calculating, we go up to here where we are 50% and we don't go there where we are less than 50%. You take as much territory as you can and then you negotiate after the war. And that's when the Americans decided to destroy the Republic of Serbian Krajina, to expel, to drive out the Serbs from its western parts. That was all the Americans doing. The Croatians were just gophers in all that. The famous US agency, IMRI, employing retired high-ranking US officers, collaborates directly with the US Defense Ministry. They started by disabling the Serbian communication system, destroying the Serbian aviation, and from then on it was easy to destroy the Serbian Krajina. But it cannot last forever. One day the Republic of Serbian Krajina will be free again. And my role is to leave a legacy that it must be free again one day. As for Bosnia-Herzegovina, the Muslims were certainly the greatest victims, and we had given them fair warning that the West was going to protect the Croats and would just use them as cannon fodder against the Serbs. However, the Muslims embarked on that war, and that war resulted in many victims on all sides, but probably the most amongst the Muslims. The fact that Bosnia and Herzegovina, as Mr. Markussen put it, proclaimed its independence, that was completely illegal. And that's why my threat was not really a threat, but a warning. And unfortunately, it turned out to be very true. The same warning turned out to be accurate and fair in Croatia too. Now, for whom was it a horrible reality? For the small, poor people who found themselves in the wrong places and suffered. But they suffered not because I had said that rivers of blood would flow. It was because of those who knew that rivers of blood would flow when they proclaimed independence. And when one Serb is in danger, all of us other Serbs have a duty to help them. Imagine, Mr. President, if the French people in Quebec were in danger, were in jeopardy. All the France would be up in arms. They would not let it happen. How could we Serbs be expected to stand by and watch if somebody is putting in jeopardy our brothers and sisters in Croatia? We could not sit on our hands. We had to fight to protect them. Now, how successful we were in that fight is another matter. And another problem that's very important here. In this process of the breakup of Yugoslavia, who started killing and expelling first? The moment Tudjman came into power, his regime started persecuting Serbs, dismissing them from work, forcing them to sign oaths of loyalty, to request the so-called domovnica, a new ID document that had not existed before, to humiliate them in all manners. The Serbs started running away from larger Croatian cities like Zagreb and Varaždin and many other areas of Croatia as early as 1990, from Split, of course. And the first killings that happened were killings of Serbs. Urban Serbs, townsfolk, who had never been involved in any sort of resistance, in any sort of fighting. Secondly, Tudjman immediately started to restore old Ustasha symbols and iconography. We knew all about Tudjman, that he used to be one of Tito's generals and then found connections with Ustasha emigres. And he even brought a leading Ustasha emigre, Gojko Šušak, to become his defense minister. You've heard of Gojko Šušak. He was for many years the Ustasha leader of the Croatian emigre circles. Tudjman made it clear that he was a supporter and a big fan of the Pavelić regime, and Maus Luburić, a leading Ustasha after the killing of Ante Pavelić. And Ante Pavelić was killed by a Serb Chetnik. In fact, that Serb actually only wounded him, and then he succumbed to his wounds during treatment in Spain. And then Tudjman, who made no bones about his connections with the Ustasha emigre circles, his connections with the Roman Catholic Church, and especially with the Herzegovina priests, Franciscan priests, based in Široki Brijeg in Bosnia-Herzegovina, the hotbed of the Ustasha movement through hundreds of years. A deputy takes the floor in the Croatian parliament, raises his arm in the fascist salute and shouts pro patria.
Da li je to onda povampirena?
Don't you think that it's the ghost of the Ustasha beast revived? And that's what I was warning about. That's exactly what I said. The Ustasha beast is rearing its head again. I was blamed for identifying Croats with Ustashas. It's true that at the first elections, Tudjman did not get an overwhelming majority. He got 48%, but he still got into government. But later on, he was vastly supported by a great majority of his people, until he finished all the dirty business that had to be done. When that was done, and when the Americans and the European Union gave guarantees to Croatia that they would get to keep their territorial integrity, turning against Tudjman. He was no longer useful. He needed to be chased away. However, his death put an end to all that. There occurred changes even in his party. Sanader came into power, started a process of de-Tudjmanization, but then got stuck in all sorts of corruption scandals. Tomislav Nikolic gave an interview to some foreign magazine in 2008, a Danish magazine, I believe, when he said he wanted to become a Serbian Sanader. I was here in the DU with Rasim Delic, the Bosnian general. We were on good terms. We swapped books and newspapers. He likes to read, as I do. And he brought to me this Sarajevo Muslim magazine, where I read this interview given by Tomislav Nikolic. And that's when it became absolutely clear to me what his political role was and for whom he was actually working. Tudjman showed exactly who he was once more in his book called The Lawless Roads of Reality, or something like that. In my own book, The Roman Catholic Criminal Project of the Artificial Croatian Nation, I quoted some passages from that book. And Tudjman openly advocates genocide in that book. And he refers to the Bible as his main support, the Old Testament, quoting or showing how God destroyed entire nations, including women and children, if they stood in the way of his beloved Isaiah. Tudjman uses history as a tool that has to be used when it suits you and then discarded. Tudjman resolved the problem of Serbs in Croatia in the same way. If there were 12% of them in Croatia before the war, he wanted to reduce them to 5%, believing that they would then have no major collective rights. They could be reduced to the status of a national minority.
Dakle, u mojim rečima.
Therefore, in my words, in my speeches, in 1990 and 1991, there was no exaggeration at all. I presented the truth and I issued warnings. However, there's something else that really makes me laugh here, and I must say that you, judges, in your decision pursuant to Rule 98 bis, and Mr. Antonetti in his separate opinion have provided the background for the prosecution to behave the way they did. You referred to my speeches in your decisions, my speeches from the period that is beyond the scope of the indictment, those that I delivered in 1990-91 and then after 1993. Or you referred to the speeches that were not even mentioned in the indictment. There are only 3 of my speeches that are referred to in the indictment. The invented, the made-up speech in Vukovar, the made-up speech in Zvornik, and the speech in Hrtkovci that was not made up fully, but you had it before you in its entirety. And all of a sudden you refer to some other speeches. I'm really astounded. You, Mr. Antonetti, you are famous in France as an excellent lawyer. Jacques Vergès really commended you wholeheartedly. How could you even think that some charge that is not even mentioned in the indictment can appear subsequently, all of a sudden, out of the blue? If some idiot had concluded in a previous decision issued here in Rwanda or in The Hague that some speeches could subsequently be mentioned and form the base for a judgment. This is ridiculous. You cannot issue a judgment based on anything that is not mentioned in the indictment. All the charges have to be clearly presented in the indictment. The act, the criminal act, every criminal act has to be explained fully in the indictment, because I have to know what I'm defending myself against. I try to defend myself against two made-up speeches and one real speech, and now all of a sudden you are mentioning some other speeches. But you have to write a new indictment, you have to organize a new trial, but you can't do that. What you did in 2010, 2011 and 2012, and you inserted into the case file things that were not there before, that's useless. I've not read any of those things to this very day, because I simply have not had the time. You mentioned a heap of documents there, those documents that have never been even mentioned in the courtroom. A document can be bar-tabled without a witness appearing viva voce, but that document has to be mentioned in the courtroom. It has to be said explicitly. This is the document where it said so-and-so, and then I have the right to answer that the document doesn't prove this or that, but rather represent this or that. This is how students in the first year of law school are explained the essence of the law. But here in the Hague Tribunal, anything goes, and you're used to that. Whatever comes to anybody's mind, everything goes, everything can be done. One more thing that is very important, and it has to be said in the introduction to my closing argument, is your referring to Nahimana case. You never provided me with that judgment. I had to finance myself its translation into Serbian. In the Nahimana case, there were 3 accused. I believe that there were 3 accused. And they were charged with a public and direct instigation and call to genocide. It is only with genocide, pursuant to the Convention on Genocide, even public appearance and calling people to genocide is punishable, although no genocide was ever attempted. For example, you may say, I am inviting you to destroy this or that ethnic, racial or religious group. This is already punishable pursuant to the Convention on Genocide. However, this applies only to the crime of genocide as a crime above all crimes. This cannot apply to either the Geneva Conventions or the violations of the customs of war. This cannot apply to crimes against humanity. In all the other forms of instigation, instigation has to largely contribute to the execution of crime. Instigation does not have to be an irreplaceable factor of a crime. Maybe the crime would have happened even without any instigation. However, if there had been instigation, then that instigation has to be a substantial contribution to the execution of the crime itself. And here the prosecution refers to my speech given in the center of Belgrade and links it to a crime that happened in Kozluk or in some other village in the municipality of Zvornik, because they happened more or less at the same time. This could not be seen as an instigation. What other stupid things were done by the judges in the appeals judgment in the Nahimana case? They sentenced to very long imprisonment because of direct and public call to genocide. And they say in their judgment, because of the same
actions, this was not only a call to genocide, but it was also a call to extermination. Hold on, what is a difference in principle between genocide and extermination? The number of people, everything else, the two crimes have in common. There's no difference. If something has been proclaimed genocide, you cannot proclaim it some other crime at the same time. For example, you have murder as a form of prosecution, or you can say this is prosecution per se. If somebody is condemned for genocide, then that's enough. There could be no other crimes involved with that. For example, somebody kills a man with a knife, gives him 3 blows with a knife, and one blow just scratches his arm, the other blow is in the stomach, and the third blow is in the heart. What crime is that? What crime are we talking about? This is the crime of murder, of homicide. What kind of homicide or murder? It's a different story, whether it's just a homicide, a murder, killing, a manslaughter. Now imagine a trial chamber that would say this is a murder and also a serious bodily harm and also a slight bodily harm, all at the same time. Now, such a trial chamber would be the laughing stock of the entire world. And if Nahimana, with his associates, was charged and convicted of genocide and instigation to genocide, this is enough. You don't have to try him for anything else. However, unfortunately, this tribunal and the tribunal for Rwanda, which have one and the same appeals chamber, there are a lot of illiterate, uneducated people among the judges, among the prosecutors, so anything goes. Maybe my problem is the fact that I have read almost all the sentences issued here in The Hague, and 2 or 3 more issued by the tribunal in Rwanda, that I am not afraid of the lawyers whose main concern is not to be in the good book of the registry because they are expecting favors from them. I am going to say everything. I'm going to hit you where it hurts the most. I am not even remotely interested in your judgment, and I have told you that already 100 times. Whatever you give me, whatever sentence you give me, it will mean life for me, a life sentence. So why should I care about your judgment? Why should I care about your final sentence?
Tužilaštvo.
The OTP topsy-turvy presents its thesis, elaborates certain crime locations and crime bases, and at the outset Mr. Markusin started with Zvornik. I'm not going into all of the details of what he said. There had been a lot of words about that when particular witnesses appeared in the courtroom here. I have to repeat only the most important things. The volunteers of the Serbian Radical Party participated in the liberation of Zvornik. Why do I say liberation? Because previously Zvornik had been occupied by the Muslim paramilitary forces armed to the tooth, and they also distributed weapons to the territorial defense and the local police stations. Among those Muslims, there was a large number of well-known criminals from Zvornik. They were the first one who took Zvornik, and the Serbs had to flee the town, and they did not take any of their assets with them.
They simply took their children in their arms. They fled across the Drina to the other side of the Drina River in order to save themselves. And then what happened was a Serbian counterattack. And I'm very proud that the volunteers of the Serbian Radical Party participated in that counter-assault. The counter-assault was carried out by the JNA. Under the command of the operative group Drina that was at Gučevo. And the most serious force among them was the tank brigade that had arrived from Jastrebarsko near Zagreb under the command of Colonel Tačić. The JNA did not have enough troops. The territorial defense was mobilized in the area of Zvornik. The territorial defense was also mobilized on the right bank of the Drina in Serbia, in Loznica, Mali Zvornik, and some other adjacent municipalities. And the reserve forces of the police were mobilized. They were joined by a unit of some 100 members of the Serbian Radical Party under the command of the judge from Loznica, Dragan Cetinović. There were some other members of the Serbian Radical Party that participate in fighting, but not as members of the volunteers. They had gone there of their own will. They were from Mali Zvornik. They were radicals who testified here, and some of them had been mobilized directly by the JNA. One of them was Zoran Subotic, who served as the commander of the territorial defense in the liberated Zvornik for a while. That unit participated in fighting until the moment Kula Grad fell. Until the 26th of April, when Kula Grad fell, Šešeljevci were there, and there is official proof of that. Dragan Cetinović then came back with his unit and continued working as a judge in Loznica. A year later, I bestowed upon him the title of the Serbian Chetnik Voivoda to credit him for his services during the liberation of Zvornik. There may have been some individuals who stayed on of his own will. Perhaps Slavković was a member of that will. Later on he was tried in Belgrade. He probably stayed on of his own will. After the 26th of April, completely new units were set up there. Igor Marković was the first one, and later on Yellow Ops, then Pivarski set up his own unit. It had no more than 10 men, and it was linked to the police. Then Nishki had his own unit, and in his statement he said himself that he was Arkansman. Gogic was also an Arkansman. Gogic may have been in Cetinović's unit up to the 26th of April. However, Cvetinović was no longer there. After that day, he was no there. At one moment, I was prone to start thinking that Miroslav Vuković was a commander there, but then I saw his statement. He had argued with Ljubica Petković, and he had not gone with the volunteers. He went of his own will to provide security for a factory there. And then, together with me, he was in Podgorica when he was assassinated, when 62 of us were wounded there, and he was one of those. He wasn't assassinated, he was wounded. He was one of those who were the most seriously wounded. He still has shrapnel in the lower parts of his leg and the stomach, and after the 25th of May there was no chance that he could be in Zvornik. You mentioned that there was somebody called Čelo, who was also called Voivoda, and you say that he was Čelo? Čelo is one thing, Čelo is another thing. Nobody identified that Čelo of yours as Miroslav Vuković.
The witnesses themselves told you that he sported the kind of slippers worn by elderly women. They are called the zepe. The entire Serbian population is familiar with this type of woolen slippers, usually worn by elderly women. They are warm. Sometimes they are worn indoors, sometimes outside. Some elderly women even wear them into town. And all of a sudden, you say the cello was a Chetnik voivoda. And can you imagine a Chetnik voivoda wearing those woolen slippers called zepe? A Chetnik voivoda in zepe? No, nobody was a Chetnik voivoda before me, before May 1993. You say that you have proven beyond reasonable doubt all the crimes charged in the indictment. You did not, because they were never seriously contested. I did not have an opportunity to deal with that. I didn't have an opportunity to discuss whether crimes happened or not. The trial chamber has denied me the right to finance my defense. The assistance that I had was very limited and very restricted, so I really could not deal with that at all. I could do it to the extent to which the OTP has some wittingly or unwittingly or sometimes by mistake has provided me with a certain quantity of documents to see whether things did happen, how they happened, if I could. Arkan was in Zvornik. We have clarified that. First of all, we had a witness who stated that Arkan was paid to participate in the liberation of Zvornik, and that was done by Biljana Plavšić. He came with 20 or 30 men, and he had started from Karakaj. He had some casualties. His wrists were slapped, and then he had to give up. And it was only in the afternoon that the JNA actually launched the attack together with the volunteers of the Serbian Radical Party. The crimes that happened in Zvornik were ascribed to Arkan. The crimes that happened before the 26th of April. There is no single piece of indicia that a volunteer of the Serbian Radical Party committed a crime. The JNA sent its pathologists from the Military Medical Academy to carry out preliminary investigation after the crimes. You had an expert here, Zoran Stankovic, who described that for us. The JNA wanted to process those crimes. However, under the ultimatum on the 19th of May, it had to withdraw from Bosnia and Herzegovina. That's why the crimes were never processed. And who can you ascribe that to? The fact that the crimes were never prosecuted. You wanted to ascribe it to me, you say? According to the third category of the JCE. According to that category, you yourself can be prosecuted. The OTP, the judges, you can all be prosecuted for my attempted murder, for example.
You willingly agreed, for example, to take part in a JCE, whose aim is to remove me from the political life of Serbia. However, you believe that that could be done through court proceedings without shedding blood, and that you can achieve the best possible results. However, some of the members of your JCE, notably the American, the British and the French intelligence services, tried to assassinate me on the night between the 8th and 9th of March. They might have been successful in that, but you didn't know that they were planning this murder. But you knew them, and you could have predicted that the killing of me by these services could only have been a logical assumption. And that is why you can be included into the category 3 of JCE. I like to describe things in the most absurd manner, because only in that manner can things become crystal clear.
Eto, krenuo sam od zvonika, mada je redoslijed mogao biti drugačiji.
It is my fault that Arkan committed crimes. So, I started with Zvornik simply due to the fact that Mr. Marcusin started with Zvornik. However, I would have preferred to start with Vukovar. Am I right that we're going to take a break very soon? Okay, I'll say a few words about Zvornik and then I'll move to Vukovar after the break. Crimes were committed in Zvornik towards the end of May and in June. But there was chaos in Zvornik, utter lawlessness. At one point, the Yellow Wasps arrested Brano Grujic, the president of the municipality, and dragged him through town. On the 15th of May, the Muslims attacked a JNA column, which resulted in the death of about 150 soldiers. This is what the newspaper said. The killing of these soldiers caused the eruption of hatred on the Serbian side, and especially after an influx of refugees came, Serb refugees came to Zvornik because they had no place to go. And there was no need for any harsh words to be exchanged or harsh looks. The very fact that so many people came there, people expelled from their homes, was a disconcerting fact for the Muslims. So many of them left for Tuzla, those who didn't want to fight. Some of them went to Hungary. And there was a witness here who testified to that, and I heard that he died the other day. So, as I said, they decided to flee rather than fight, and they went abroad. Now, this left Zvornik without any authorities. There was no one who could control the situation. Now, who's to blame for that? That you have anarchy all of a sudden. And this is a good breeding ground for crimes. Some of them were really monstrous and pathological. You often suggest to the witnesses only after the fact that Šešeljevci took part in those crimes. But we have statements that Muslims and injured parties gave to the Muslim authorities in which there is no mention of either Šešelj or his party. You included Šešelj's name in the statements that you wrote yourselves, because all the statements submitted here by the OTP are the statements not written by the witnesses. They were written by the OTP and they were fashioned to suit their needs, and more often than not the witnesses didn't know what they were signing at all. Even if you speak about persons who have only basic education, and sometimes those with university degrees are unable to understand what you have inserted. It might look quite benign, but then after they sign it, it turns out to be something else. So, you try to attribute to me the events in Zvornik. Not a single volunteer of the Serbian Radical Party prior to the 26th of April was either suspected of or indicted. If Slavko Grujic remained there with the volunteers, it's his problem. I couldn't be his
Ako je Stojan Pivarski na
keeper or nanny.
A onda uzvojnik
If another member of the Radical Party became a volunteer and gathered a small group from Ruma and went on the front line, do you expect me to think about his whereabouts or what he was doing? I never heard of him being in Zvornik at all until I saw that in the documents disclosed to me. And most importantly, and I'm going to finish with this, it was you who provided me with a pile of original documents that speak about the structure of the Serbian armed forces in Zvornik after 26th of April until the end of June or beginning of July. I have lists of all these soldiers and policemen. And there is no indication to say that those were members of Šešeljevci or Radical Party. Each and every unit has its name there, but there is no name of Šešeljevci. You admitted, or you tendered into evidence these lists. Now, what am I supposed to do? Do I have to ponder whether each and every individual there did something or not? I can't do that. And you are even ridiculing the fact that when Žuća's group was arrested, that I condemned that at a press conference in Belgrade. You said that my intention was to distance myself from me, and you also provided a lie that I arranged for Žuća to be transferred to Skelani. I never went to Kelani, but in that place we had quite a few volunteers of the SRS because that was the road that led to Srebrenica. You also referred to an election rally held on the 28th of May in Belgrade when I said that we still have to mop up the left bank of Drina and to open a corridor towards the Banja Luka. Now, what does the term mopping up in military terms mean? What does it mean in our speeches? It never implied that Muslims should be cleansed. They had another 3 strongholds in that area, and my idea was to mop up these 3 strongholds so that they cannot jeopardize the dams on the Drina, particularly the Crveni Mulj Drina, the destruction of which would have been disastrous. Srebrenica and Žepa and Goražde, had they been liberated immediately, we wouldn't have had all these ordeals with the international community, and there wouldn't be any need to declare them safe haven. And all those who failed to listen to me, it turns out that they were in the wrong. I can only regret that I didn't hold such a position of power in which I could have forced them to listen to me. This is my sole regret. And if they had been forced to heed my warnings, many things would have been avoided and the Serbs would not have been defeated in such a...
We shall have a 20-minute break and resume in 20 minutes' time.
Vojvodové.